You're sitting in a chair right now, inside a room, inside a building, on a street, in a city, inside a country. You probably don't think about that last part very often. The lines on the map, the flag, the passport, the taxes, they're just there. But for 99.9% of human history, that invisible box didn't exist. For over 300,000 years, your ancestors lived without countries. They roamed, they gathered, they hunted, they traded, they fought, they loved, they died, and not one of them ever pledged allegiance to a flag. So what changed? And why did your ancestors, people just like you, with the same brain, the same fears, the same hopes, decide to lock themselves inside something called a nation? The answer is far stranger than you think. You probably learned in school that countries emerged when humans invented farming. The story goes like this. Agriculture created surplus food. Surplus food allowed people to settle down. Settlements grew into cities, and cities needed governments. So, countries were born. It's a clean story. It makes sense, but it's almost certainly wrong. Here's the problem. There was a 4,000-year gap between the expansion of agriculture and the founding of the earliest states. Agriculture spread around 9,000 years ago. The first known states emerged only about 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia. For 1,000 years. That's longer than the entire history of written civilization. Your ancestors farmed for 4 millennia before anyone thought to draw a border. So if farming didn't create countries, what did? Anthropologist James C. Scott has spent decades studying how states form and how people resist them. In his book Against the Grain, he offers a provocative answer. States didn't emerge from agriculture in general, he argues. They emerged from one specific type of agriculture, grain. Wheat, barley, rice, maize. Why does that matter? Because grains grow above ground, ripen at a predictable time, and are easy to store. You know what else that makes them? Easy to tax. Scott argues that the first states were essentially protection rackets. A small elite would force people to grow grain, extract a portion as tax, and use that surplus to fund further exploitation. Writing wasn't invented to record poetry or history. It was invented to record taxes. The earliest known writing, in Mesopotamia, is mostly accounting records, ledgers, receipts. You might be thinking, but surely this was just one unusual group in one part of the world? Here's the thing. The pattern repeated independently in at least 6 places on Earth. Archaeologists have identified primary state formation, where a first-generation state evolves without contact with any existing states. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, China, Mesoamerica, and Peru. All within a relatively short window of history, all following a similar trajectory. So what were people doing for those 4,000 years between farming and states? They were farming, but they were also, apparently, actively avoiding states. Scott points out that for thousands of years after agriculture emerged, most farming communities remained small-scale, egalitarian, and deliberately decentralized. They cultivated a wide variety of crops, vegetables, fruits, roots, tubers, precisely because those crops were hard for any would-be ruler to tax. If a tyrant showed up demanding grain, you could always move. You could always disappear into the hills, or the forest, or the marsh. And many did. That's right. Your ancestors didn't just stumble into countries. They actively resisted them for millennia. They preferred the flexibility, the freedom, the unpredictability of life without a king. For thousands of years, they said no. So what finally broke that resistance? The answer is power, specifically, the concentration of power through warfare and territorial expansion. Political scientist Peter Turchin, who applies mathematical models to history, has shown that the formation of large-scale states and empires is closely tied to a society's capacity for collective action. When groups face a common enemy, they band together. Cooperation intensifies. Hierarchies emerge. And once those hierarchies are in place, they don't go away. But here's the twist Turchin discovered. As empires grow, they eventually become unstable. The very forces that created them, population pressure, elite overproduction, internal conflict, also destroy them. States are born, they expand, they collapse, and the cycle repeats. This isn't ancient history. This is still happening. But wait, if states are so unstable, why do countries still exist? That's where Azar Gat enters the picture. Gat, a political scientist at Tel Aviv University, counters the prevailing theory that nations are modern inventions. In his book Nations, he argues that ethnicity and nationalism have deep roots in human nature, extending back to our aboriginal condition. Culture, combined with kinship, has always defined ethnic allegiances. Nations and national states, Gat contends, have existed since the beginning of statehood millennia ago. In other words, we didn't invent countries because we wanted to be taxed. We invented them because we already saw ourselves as part of a tribe, a people, a culture, and the state was just a way of organizing that identity on a larger scale. So which is it? Was the country invented by a grain-obsessed elite running a protection racket? Or did it emerge organically from our deep-seated need to belong? The answer, as with most things in human history, is both. States needed grain to tax, but they also needed people to believe in them. And people needed to believe in something bigger than themselves. The modern nation-state, with its borders and passports and flags, is the strange offspring of that union, a marriage between the elite's hunger for control and the human hunger for meaning. And here's the uncomfortable part. That marriage is still happening, right now, inside your own brain. Every time you feel pride in your country, every time you feel a pang of patriotism, every time you say we, when talking about your nation, you are experiencing the same psychological mechanism that convinced an ancient farmer to hand over his grain to a king he'd never met. You are still that farmer. You are still that tribesperson. You are still that person who, for 300,000 years, lived without lines on a map. But you also live in a world where those lines are everywhere. And they shape everything. Your rights, your opportunities, your identity, your very sense of who you are. So the next time you look at a map, really look at it. Those borders aren't natural. They're not inevitable. They're not even that old. They are a 5,000-year-old experiment in how to organize 8 billion people. And the experiment is still running. You are part of it right now.